So I think now will be a good time to begin. So welcome everyone to the third session for Database Tycoon's summer camp. So if it's your first time here, welcome. If you're returning, also welcome. Just a few reminders before we begin. So this is going to be about an hour-long session where Chisom, who actually is an engineer and a project manager here at Database Tycoon, will be leading you all through a session on DBT, which is essentially the fundamentals of data. And throughout this session, if you have any questions, there is going to be time at the end. Just I'm not sure how you want to approach questions, but usually I recommend for people to just write their questions in the chat. So that way, at the end of the session, when you have a Q&A, you can just go ahead and answer the questions, unless you want to answer them live on the call. Really up to you. So yeah, and then to everybody that attended the session. So if you attend 3 summer camp sessions, doesn't have to be in a row, just any 3 of our 9 sessions, you will receive a certificate of completion on your LinkedIn. And anybody who attends the session today will receive an email with a link to the recorded session, so you can always go back and watch it for your convenience. And yeah, and I guess like to kick things off, everybody wants to just write in the channel where they're calling in from and how you found out about summer camp and what about data are you interested in? Nova Scotia, Brighton, London, another Brighton. Lots of UK folks, Malaysia, Lagos, lots of, oh wow, everybody here, international, India, Colombia, wow, Netherlands. All right, cool. So you guys can keep on typing in the chat if you want. Otherwise, I think we are ready to get started. Chisom, you want to kick things off?
Yeah, definitely.
Great.
So once again, welcome to this session of Database Tycoon Summer Camp. I will be taking you through DBT. If you've never heard it before, I'll try to explain it so you get an idea of what it looks like. And if you've learned or you know how to use DBT before, what you're going to be gaining from this session is just like a refresher and also some best practices. So I'll go ahead and share my screen now. Please let me know when you can see my screen and we will kickstart this. Okay, so my name is Chisom Mbama. I'm an analytics engineer here at Database Tycoon. And let's kickstart this. So I'm going to go running through these parts. So I'm going to start by talking about transformation. If you are familiar with, the data setup, data space, you would have heard of ELT or ETL before. So I'm going to explain a bit of what that means, and specifically the T in ETL, not the E in ETL, the T in ETL, which is like the transformation part of this. Then I'll move to what transformation matters, because before we begin to talk about DBT is a tool that allows us to transform our data. So I want to explain why that is actually important, and then we'll move to DBT itself. It's one of the many tools you can use in data transformation. You understand the certain things that DBT can do, and if you've been manually working on some things to clean your data, you see how DBT can actually be of help for you. And then we will talk about getting started with DBT. If you're hearing it for the first time, where do you start from? What do you do? Where do you go? We'll talk about that. There are also some important components of DBT that you need to know for you to be able to actually use DBT to transform your data. So I'll touch on those. And then we'll talk about setting up a DBT project. I recently wrote 2 articles here at Database Tycoon on how to set this up. So we'll look through that. And then best practices. How can you make sure that you're using it right? Your code is performant, your code is modular, is reusable, is fast, right? So we're going to learn all of that. If you have any question, just feel free to type it in the chat box and I will get it at the end of the session. Okay, So let's get right into it. If you see me looking in this direction, it's because I have a screen here. And if you cannot hear me at any point, please let me know. Okay, so transformation, C in ELT. So like I said, if you're familiar with the modern data integration approach, you would have heard about ELT before, or ETL. It's an acronym for extract, load, and transform. Now, when you think about data generally, the idea of data analytics engineering, data analytics is so that you can be able to get insights from the data that you have and make decisions based off it. But before we get to that point where we can make decision from our data, the data goes through a lot of process, right? And this is what the ELT process can mean. So first of all, there has to be an extraction. Here's your data. Where are the sources? Is it on Instagram? Is it in your emails? Is it in HubSpot? Wherever that is, you have to be able to extract that data from all of those different sources, right? Bring it into a particular warehouse, keep it somewhere, and then transform it, clean it up for it to look like something that can actually give you insight and you can make decisions. So transformation, which is what we're going to be focusing on in this process, is that process that converts your raw data after it has been loaded into your warehouse into data that is now clean, that is structured and meaningful enough for you to be able to report or for you to feed it into your models if you're interested in machine learning and all of those things, right? So that's what the transformation part does for us. And so here you can see this illustration I have here. So this is what it looks like. You have your data sources from different places. You have to extract them from wherever they are, load it into a data warehouse, and then begin to transform the data before you can use it. Yeah, so that's the idea of transformation. I like to call it, in simple terms, cleaning your data, making the data actually make sense so that you can get insights from it. Now, the question is, why is transformation important? Why can't we just like move, into getting insights from, your spreadsheets and all of those things? Why do we need to like go through this process of actually transforming and cleaning our data? It's important for you to know why, so that you can leverage the features of, DBT when you get into it for transformation. So first off, raw data is usually very messy. When you think about data, like you saw in that diagram, it comes from different sources, applications, spreadsheet databases, APIs, and each of these different sources could have their own formats, right? There could be inconsistencies, some values could be missing, some fields could just be confusing and very hard to interpret right away, right? Now, your business users don't want to spend a lot of time trying to do that. They just want to come look at a dashboard or just see, okay, this is what we're talking about. This is the revenue we made in the past month. This is the amount of customers we had yesterday. They just want to be able to look at clean, organized, and trusted data to make informed decision, right? So that is one of the reasons why we take the pain to actually transform our data for it to make sense. And one thing you begin to understand with DBT is that as opposed to, we'll get there, as opposed to having to do this over and over and over again, you can do it once, automate it in a way that whenever data now comes in from any source, it goes through your already set process and you can see it at the front end looking very clean and ready to give you insights. Yeah, now transform data also improves performance and usability. You can, like I said, use the data is more performance just because it's transformed. And also, one very important concept in transformation is that a lot of times, there are specific business logic that you need to put into the data, that you need to pay attention to, right? Let's say, for example, you have your data coming from a source where the time zone is, is different, coming from maybe the WAT time zone, but your end users are in a different time zone. You want to be able to convert, right, your data to a time zone that is more accurate for them, right? So a lot of business logic, context needs to go into that. So all of those things make it important for us to actually focus on transforming data. Sometimes the column names are not clear. Sometimes the data type are incorrect. The tables are not joined. emphasizing this because this is what you actually do in DBT. DBT is the tool that helps you to do all these things, which is transform your data, right? The data might come in like JSON formats. Some fields may need to be unnested and all of those things. Some tables may be missing primary keys, and then you want to actually like maybe create a surrogate key or something. So there's a lot of like cleanup in quotes that needs to happen before you can actually get insights from your data. And that's where the transformation process comes in. Yeah, so that's about transformation in the ELT process. Now, DBT. Where does DBT come into play in all of this? Simply put, DBT is a tool that actually helps you to transform your data. Yeah, it helps you to transform your data. It's an acronym for Data Build Tool. If you try to like do a search online and just type DBT, if you use it, if you put it in uppercase, you see something that has to do with dialectical therapy, etc. So in case you're searching, it's written in lowercase and it means data build tool, not the other medical one. So it's an open source framework and it just brings the best practices of software engineering to analytics. So if you think of software engineering, you're able to version control, you're able to like test, you're able to incorporate modularity, reusability. That's the core, what we know about software engineering. But traditionally, you see analysts actually like cleaning their data in spreadsheets, on pivoting, all those things in a spreadsheet. But with DBT, all of those software engineering principles and abilities that makes it easy, for the software engineers, with DBT, we can now leverage that actually in analytics to actually transform our data. So instead of just writing multiple scripts and, fragile scattered scripts, DBT can help you to write your data, write your codes, run it, test it, document it, and put it in such a way that is structured and is maintainable. That's one of my favorite parts of transformation using DBT. That after I have worked on a logic within DBT, right, every time that a new data now comes in, I don't need to do that anymore. There are tests in place, there are logics in place that it just flows through to give me my results, which is really amazing. So with DBT, you can just write your transformation logic as simple SQL select statements or Python data frames, and DBT does almost everything for you. And you can be able to just like move that data into your BI tool, visualize it, make sense out of your data. So DBT is a really amazing tool. We're going to be talking about some of its capabilities and how we can actually like start using it at this point. If you're following so far, just give me a thumbs up in the chat box. A thumbs up. Amazing. Okay, amazing. Okay, so DBT capability. So DBT, data build tool allows us to transform data and all of those things. These are some of my favorites. Is inexhaustible, and almost every time there are like new features that are actually being added to just make our lives very easy as analytics professionals. So the first one is modularity and reusability, right? So you can actually build your transformations as small reusable models that can be combined to handle complexity without repetition. So for example, instead of writing like a very long SQL script to be able to achieve something here, and instead of actually having to write one particular type of code multiple times, you can just create one of those parts, put it somewhere, and then be able to actually like reuse and reuse and reuse. So when you think about modularity, is actually the idea of breaking something that is large and complex into smaller, self-contained and reusable parts, right? So in the context of transformation with DBT, modularity allows you to build each of your transformation step in its own, a small model, a small script that you can put into a particular model and then reuse throughout the project. You can create a macro. All of all those things just makes your life way easier, and making sure that your code, you're not repeating yourself with your code, which is actually very important. Then we have testing and monitoring. Have you ever witnessed a case where you claimed a data set, right? But all of a sudden you realize that I've cleaned this before. Maybe new data came in and something is all of a sudden is wrong, right? In this particular column, you wanted to just receive either A or B, but all of a sudden you see a 2, a fall. Where did that come from? So with DBT, right, you can actually create rules. You can do like testing that allows you to catch issues early. These are the kind of things that, break your code, that makes your insights inaccurate. So, but in DBT, you can actually create tests. And so as your data flows in, before it gets to the point where you have to make a decision using that data, if there are any mistakes, right, it can like patch it for you so that you can correct it. You can also track the freshness of your data, how your model is performing over time. Then version control and collaboration. Usually as analytics professionals, we work in teams. It's not just us. People need to be able to work with you on a particular project, collaborate with you. Now with DBT, there is an incorporation of version control using Git, so you can track your changes. Your code can be reviewed before it goes live. If you're familiar with software engineering, you know that this is almost like a norm, but DBT allows us to actually do that in analytics. So version control and collaboration is one of my favorite ones. So that already like tells you that for you to be able to like use DBT, right, you need to know how to use version control like the Git. Yeah, you need a bit of familiarity with that to be able to use DBT. Then we also have documentation. This is my favorite. This is my favorite. So usually, like I said, we work in teams. You have a number of people working on the data and everything. And a lot of times there could be assumptions as to what a metric could mean, right? But in DBT, you can actually document the meaning or the definition of a particular metric in a way that anybody who knows can come and say, anybody who uses the data can come and say, okay, this particular column is the primary key. I'm not assuming that, oh, is this a primary key? Is this a secondary key? What does this mean? What does this column mean? But in DBT, you can document your metrics, like give it definitions. And so everybody who comes can be able to say, okay, this is how we use this. Whenever we see, maybe gender, it means this and this in the context of this data. All of that is well documented. And DBT allows you to now auto-generate this documentation that explains your data models, the lineage, i.e., where are the sources, where's the data coming from? How did we get to this point? This is where it came from. We joined this to this particular place, and that was really amazing, right? And so everybody can understand what is happening. Then there's also automation, right? A lot of times you want to actually understand how you got to the point where this is a particular insight. You want to be able to see your graph. This was the source. We created, this model. We joined at this particular point. We aggregated at this point before we got here. So with DBT, yeah, you don't have to like manually create that. You just run a code and it creates like everything for you. This is where you're coming from. And that can be useful if you're trying to debug. You're seeing something being wrong in a particular model. How do you go back to check where is this coming from? DBT helps you to do that. And then we also have extensibility. You want to be able to leverage macros, hooks, packages to make sure that you're not repeating yourself. Some things that you want to do or some logic that you want to incorporate into your code, somebody has already done it before. So with DBT, you can just bring in a package, put it into your model, into your code, and begin to use what somebody have created already without you having to like write a lot of that. We also have macros. If you see yourself constantly having to do something, for example, you receive your data, it's coming from a particular source or multiple sources in, JSON formats, and you have to like nest, right? And instead of having to do that over and over in all of the models that has that format, you can just create a line of code, a macro really, and store it in DBT. And so every time you want to nest that JSON file, you just call it in your project, and it makes it very easy for you. And so your code is drier. You're not repeating yourself. Yeah. We also have a lot of capabilities here, but these are just some ones that I love a lot. Not recently, talked about like documentation at a DBT meetup. So you can also like find that and watch it. I'm really excited about documentation because I believe that when you work in teams, right, data knowledge should be democratized. It shouldn't be only one person who understands what this data is or what it's doing, right? So, but with DBT, you're able to just democratize your data knowledge, put it in a place where everybody can see, everybody can actually, like follow through and understand what is happening. Okay. So that's it about DBT capabilities, and we're going to go into getting started with DBT. If you've been following so far, give me a thumbs up just to make sure that we're still here, because I can only see myself. Okay, amazing. Ritma, Oscar, I see you. Okay, Kamara, Blessing, thank you. Okay, let's talk about DBT. Where do you start from? First thing is that we have DBT Core and DBT Cloud, right? So these are just different platforms where you can use DBT. So DBT Core is the free version of it. It's open source. It's also a command line tool, which means that you have to be able to like run your codes from the command line, like write your commands to run your models and all. And so, like I said, it allows you to transform your data really by writing modular SQL models. But with DBT Core, one of the major differences is that you have to set up your scheduling, your orchestration, your CI/CD yourself, right? So with DBT Core, just think about it as something a little bit more manual. It has most of the capabilities, but you might have to like, do it yourself. But then in DBT Cloud is the paid version, it's fully hosted. And it is web-based, so everything that you need to do is just more like a click and it's done, click and it's done, click and it's done. Meanwhile, in DBT Core, you have to write your own parts of it. So and also DBT Core is free, DBT Cloud is paid. So if you're getting started, depending on what you want to try, you can decide to use either of these ones. There are also very extensive documentations by DBT on how to get started, either with Core or with Cloud. So I also encourage you to check the documentation. So we have DBT Core versus DBT Cloud, which are like very important concepts that you need to know. And so I also want to talk about some key concepts, components that you would encounter when you have to work with DBT. So the first one is models. Yeah. So when you think about a DBT project, we'll get to the point where I'll show you what the ideal structure of a DBT project looks like. But one thing you will constantly witness is models. So when you hear models or you see models in DBT, they're just SQL files or Python files. And within them, you define how your data should be cleaned or how the transformation should happen. Remember, we talked about transformation has to do with cleaning. So maybe you're changing the timestamp or the time zone, you're casting your data, you're joining your data together. So all of those happen within your models. So those are those modular files, right, that occur within your DBT model. They let you break complex transformations, like we said, into small reusable steps. So within a model, you have a small part of it that solves a particular problem or does one thing or the other, and then you can finally join everything together into also another model. So the models form the heart of your DBT project. They power your dashboard ultimately, and also your analysis. That's for models. We have sources. This is also a very important concept because you need to be able to bring in, right, a data source into DBT or data sources into DBT and then begin to transform from there. So usually you need to connect to a data warehouse like Snowflake, Databricks, BigQuery. There has to be a data warehouse that you connect to. And then having connected to that data warehouse, you need to now define your source. So we have source files. And then you're able to define it in DBT. So they represent the raw tables in your data warehouse. Remember the ETL process, you've extracted your raw data, from different sources into a data warehouse, right? You've extracted it and then you've loaded it into your data warehouse, and then DBT now transforms that data. So you have to be able to define the source. So you usually would have like a source file. They're very important components of your DBT project. So they're like your raw events, transactions, or customer tables. Like I said, you declare them in DBT to make it clear where your data starts from. And it lets you add like descriptions, enable freshness, and checks to alert when your data stops updating. This just simply means that at the source level, so you have to remember that DBT, in a DBT project, right, you are combining a lot of different things to get to, that final product or those final products that feed into your dashboard or into your analysis, right? So now DBT needs to know where we're starting from, right? So defining your sources will help DBT to be able to draw that your graph to say this is where we're coming from and all of that. And not to get ahead of myself, but one of my best practice I always would say is that when you're writing tests in DBT, start putting your tests from the sources as much as you can. Don't wait until you're downstream in your project before you begin to add tests. I would recommend putting like a data freshness test there. Just like as much as possible, move your tests upstream if possible. So this keeps your data pipeline transparent and trustworthy. So we have sources. We also have tests. This is also a very important use of your DBT project. Like I said, transformation DBT allows you to incorporate software engineering principles into analytics. And so with tests, you're able to write rules that can catch any data issues automatically. Have, for example, a particular column where all of the data coming in has to be unique. There shouldn't be any, repeating of itself. Maybe it's like a unique ID, right? And everybody on that particular table, if you have just one unique ID, it shouldn't appear more than one. So you can just put a unique test on that column and say, hey, if there is anything, if this, if there's any time when this column is not unique, just flag me, all of those things. So we have tests, we have certain built-in tests in DBT, like the unique, not null. If you have a column where none of the values should be empty, you should always have a value. So we have those inbuilt DBT tests that you can use. And you can also write like custom tests, like, oh, I need to be able to like put this to align with my business logic. So you can write your custom test, and DBT will alert you if any of those rules are violated, and then you can catch where that is coming from, so that you don't have like mistakes as you go forward. So that's for tests. We also have documentation. I've talked about it before. So with documentation in DBT, you're able to auto-generate. DBT auto-generates your documentation from your models, your sources, and everything to just create a knowledge of your data, right? However, there's something we call YML files in DBT where you're able to, like I said earlier, define like columns, like what does this column mean? What does this table mean? The more you put in those definitions by yourself, the richer your auto-generated documentation would be when DBT actually like auto-generates it for you, right? So there are different levels of documentation. You can actually do a lot. You can just put short descriptions, you can put field level notes and everything. And so when you run your DBT docs, it generates, your lineage graph and also just a snapshot or a knowledge base of what your project is. So that's for documentation. We have materialization, very important. Now, in DBT, there are different ways that your models will be built when you run it, and you get to actually like define it. So we have tables, we have views, and we have incremental models. By default, DBT, if you don't define anything, DBT would build your model as a view by default. But then you can also define it to be built as a table or as an incremental model. So for a table, it is stored physically, it is faster to query, right? A view is more of like a virtual, sort of model. And okay, it's updated instantly, has lower storage cost, and then we have incremental models. I love this one. When you have like really large data that is usually updated multiple times, in a day, maybe facts table of customers' transactions that are happening, and is a heavy table. In DBT, you can say, hey, materialize this model as an incremental model, which means every time that it is run, right, don't rebuild from scratch, just append the new data that has been added. Doing this will just help your process to be faster. Remember, we said that when you transform or with DBT, we're able to actually increase, improve performance of our data. This is one of the major ways that can happen, mostly when you have really large tables. You can just make it to be materialized as an incremental model, and it just appends new data. Once in a while, you can refresh everything if there's a column change or something, but then it helps for everything to just be faster. And knowing when to choose the right materialization will help you to balance, the freshness of your data, your costs, and also your performance as your project scales, i.e., as you begin to add more things to your model or as your data begins to get larger and larger. So you need to know how to materialize it in the right way. Okay. This is a good point to give me a thumbs up if you've been following so far. Okay, thank you. Amazing. Okay. So we're going to talk about setting up a DBT project. I wrote 2 articles. I'm actually going to open it and show you. And I'm also going to paste a link to it in the chat box so that you can actually just bookmark it. I'd encourage you to actually take a look later. It's on Database Tycoon's LinkedIn page. So for you to set up a, for you to be able to set up a DBT project, you have to create a project structure. You have to connect it to your data warehouse, and then you have to organize your transformation logic as modular SQL model. So depending on the type of laptop system you're using, either Mac or Windows, the process is very straightforward and actually very similar. I'm just gonna share my screen to this article and run you through real quick just to guide you a bit, and we'll be back here. So you can bookmark that and check it out later. And this guide actually applies if you're using DBT Core. If you're using DBT Core, then this guide actually applies. Actually, I'll just run through that really quickly. Yeah, so this is a step-by-step guide on how to set up Windows or on Mac, specifically for DBT Core, right? So there has to be installation of Git and Python. Like I said, to use DBT, you need a bit of familiarity with Git to be able to use it. So this guide will help you to run through it to actually install DBT into your system and get started. Then you have to set up your project folder, which I mentioned here. I have added some commands that can help you do that. We would advise you to actually run your DBT project within a virtual environment, right? So you can use this. This is why you're installing Python in the first place. It's very easy. And then, you either clone an existing DBT project. Remember that we said that you could either be contributing, right, in a team, collaborating on a project, or just working on one. Depending on that, you can just initialize your Git or clone an existing project. The profiles.yaml file is a very important file in DBT, in your DBT project. This is where you actually set up, configure your data, right? The connection to your data warehouse, all of those things, your password. This is where you actually configure it so that you can run it on your system, can be able to feed from your warehouse to and fro in that way. So this is what a typical profiles.yaml file will look like. It's usually in your home directory. So you can just connect to your data warehouse there. There also has to be an installation of DBT itself, right? So if you're using DBT Core, there needs to be a little bit of familiarity with the command line to be able to do this. Don't worry if you've not done this before. It's very easy, just very easy. Once you start, it's just easier. And then also, there are also different DBT commands that you actually need to run or continue running as you build your model. We have the DBT run, we have the seed, DBT seed, and all those things. Too extensive to be covered here. This is why this is DBT 101, a refresher for anyone who hasn't used it and who has used it before, or a encouragement to anyone who hasn't used it before to actually start, because it just makes your life easier. And also, so this is the guide for installing on Windows, and then we have the one for Mac also linked here. Okay, I'm gonna go right back into my slides and I'll show you what the structure of a DBT project looks like. Okay. All right. If you can see my slide, give me a thumbs up. Amazing. Okay, so that's a guide, and also I'll just encourage you to you can follow Database Tycoon on LinkedIn. We're always releasing just new articles to help you in your data journey, similar to this one, so that you can be the first to see when that is out. So this is a picture. I don't know if you can really see it. I'll try and zoom it in a bit. This is my Max. But yeah, this is what a typical DBT project structure would look like. You have your folder structure looking like this. There are different like best practices on how to actually like structure your folder. DBT has its own best practice, but I would say depending on the organization you're working with, I'm sure there are usually like data governance policies there, so you want to adhere to that. We'll talk more about that when we move to best practices, but typically your DBT project could look like this. You have your seed file, you have your project or YAML file, you have your macros, you have your models, which we've talked about. There's usually the staging model where that's where you're bringing in your sources and just, like the initial introduction of your source data into the model. There's an intermediate part where you would like begin to do most of your transformation, the cleanings, the joinings, the aggregations and all of that. And finally, you have your marks model where it can be based on, your different KPIs in that way. You also have like packages. There are a lot of packages that exist that have been created by different people for DBT. So if you're doing something similar, maybe if you're working with a particular data source, maybe Stripe, and you're using Stripe data, there are a lot of packages that just help you to just get started without having to, start to do transformations from the start anymore. So you can leverage that. Also have snapshots and we have tests. So your DBT project, this is actually from DBT Labs. This picture is from them. So it could typically look like this. And the structure really is just based on the governance of your context here. So we'll move right into best practices for DBT, right? So the first one is modular modeling. So one of the reasons why you're transforming in the first place or using a tool like DBT in the first place is because you want to be able to, like break your transformation into smaller units. So resist the urge to write like very long lines of code. I would say a personal rule for me is once I'm exceeding 250 lines of code within a model, I think it's too much already. But then it could also depend on the context. But as much as possible, keep it short. It's easy to maintain that way. And also, you have to consider the fact that there's usually like a team using it with you. So do it in a way that anybody who is, coming to collaborate on that project, they also find it easier, right? So leverage the fact that you can just write a model and, pick it from somewhere, bring it to somewhere else. You also want to use your staging and mark layers. I showed you an architecture diagram earlier. You want to follow a layered architecture, right? Stage your raw data, build your intermediate models, and then finally your reporting maps. Don't just do everything within one, either is a folder or a particular model. Like break it down into smaller parts. It also helps you to be able to reuse as your model begins to scale. Then naming conventions, this is actually very important. You want to be able to follow a very clear and consistent naming for your models, your tests, your sources, your seed, in a way that somebody who sees it, right, can be able to understand, like, okay, this is what I assume, right, that this model is doing. Obviously, leverage your YAML also for documentation, but when you're able to follow a very clear and consistent naming convention, it just makes it easy for you. I don't know if you've ever like written, you're working on a code and then you come back and you're like, okay, who wrote this, or what did I do here? Where was I? All of those things. Now imagine if somebody else is collaborating with you on that. So little things like this just helps to make everybody's life, easier in that way. We also have macros, right? But the idea of macros is, if you find yourself repeating a particular logic throughout multiple models, you just want to create a macro out of it. Just create something like put placeholders and then just plug it, right? So you want to leverage macros a lot. It's easier to forget that that's a possibility, right? So leverage your macros, make sure you're not repeating yourself multiple logics or similar logics across multiple models. Just create a macro for that. You also want to leverage testing. The unique, the not null, the accepted values test. And also, like I said, you can also like create custom tests. You can create custom tests within DBT, right? So anything, the idea of testing is not just, oh, I just want to add a test, right? But there's an approach, there's a way I like to think about it, right? At the end of my model building, for example, right, if I can picture what I want my front end to look like, or what I want the dashboard to look like, or what the business logic is, right? This is what I expect. This is what I don't expect. This is what I want to see. I can create tests, so you can create tests really around it to make sure that as the data comes in, as it's being transformed, right, it meets all of those criteria. It helps you, saves you a lot of time. Mostly when your data begins to get large and it's hard to track, what is coming in or everything with like large models and all. Test just helps you to catch it. So this is one of the major capabilities of DBT, and I would say leverage it as much as possible. You want to, like, after building, writing your models, you want to look at it and say, where can I add a test? What columns actually need tests, in what way? Then documentation, you want to write descriptions for models and columns. Like I said earlier, DBT would auto-generate like a knowledge base of what your project looks like, right? But the richness of that documentation depends a lot on if you have added descriptions to your models, to your columns. So usually with every model that you have, you should have a YAML file for that model. You're describing, oh, this particular table or this model is for this transaction, is for this KPI, is for this. These are the 7 columns in it. This is what this one means. This is what we did to get here. These are the assumptions we are making in this particular column. So as much as possible, as you build your model, build your documentations along with it, make it rich and make it up to date. As things change, you also want to update so that at the end of the day, there are no assumptions. Like I said earlier, when you think about the idea of the analytics process, you're trying to actually be able to like make decisions, right, at the end of the day. And assumptions in your data can go a long way in actually giving the wrong insight and then wrong decisions and make. So things like this goes a very long way in ensuring that at the end of the day, the stakeholders are making, accurate decisions because your data is accurate, is reliable. So your documentation help you a lot. Nobody's assuming this is what this meant. In fact, moving beyond DBT, when you move to your BI tools, I'd always would say, if you can add a definition, please add a definition. So you've finished your transformation, you've moved into the BI tool, you've surfaced your KPIs so that people can come and say, oh, this is the revenue, this is, our sales over a period of time and everything. Just put a definition. This is what we're using. This is what this column is. These are the assumptions that we have made so that at the end of the day, ultimately, decision making is accurate. Because remember, all of these things is so that we can make decisions, right? So we have documentation. We also have avoid select. I always would say in your DBT model, avoid using select star. So if you're familiar with SQL, if you attended the SQL session, there's actually a recording on our LinkedIn page, so you can check it out. So you can select all of your columns, but I would say be explicit as much as possible. Because sometimes you have tables that there's just a lot of, columns in it. Where do you start from? But as you move closer to your math model, i.e. your final model, avoid your select star. Just be explicit. I'm trying to bring out this column, that column as much as possible. Don't just say, oh, select everything. It helps your table to be more performance. So you're not bringing in columns that you don't need, right? So, you're keeping your model as light as possible. There's a column you're not using, you don't need to bring it. So avoid select star and be explicit. And also it helps you to prevent unexpected schema drift. Use seeds and snapshots wisely. So the idea of seeds is that you're bringing in, actual raw data into the DBT model. Remember we said in the ETL process, you extract the raw data, right? Load it into your data warehouse and then begin to transform. But DBT gives you an opportunity to bring in like maybe a static data that is not existing in your data warehouse into your DBT model, right? So you want to use that wisely, optimize the process as much as possible. And then we have leveraging of incremental models. Yeah, once you see that this table is taking a long time to run, begin to check it. Is this a candidate for an incremental model? So you want to leverage that a lot of times to handle large tables efficiently. So you're only processing new or changed data. Okay, I'm just going to end by saying that there are a lot of documentation by DBT. So I would encourage you to actually like visit the sites, look at the documentation, and it will help you a lot. There are also like, there are a lot of documentations there that will help you in just like some of the best practices, some of the tools, capabilities, and also new features that are being added. So we have like less than 10 minutes to go, and I would like us to ask questions at this point. Give me a thumbs up if you followed to this very point. And if you feel like you've gotten value so far. Okay, amazing. Thank you, Stephen, Chloe, Ritzmar. Okay, if you have a question, you can go for it. You can either raise your hand or type in the comment section. Chloe, I can take questions now, right?
Thanks.
Okay, amazing. Okay, go for it. I think I see a hand.
Hello, Chisom. Thank you very much for that. That was a very good overview. Now, I was wondering for the incremental models, if your data sources change not only with new records but also upserts, or I mean updates to past records, how does the upserts? How do you upsert into your incremental model?
Okay, so for incremental models, if like, let's say a column changes, if I'm hearing your question very well, right, there has to be
a previous row that has already been loaded in the model gets updated. So it's not just new records or deletion of records, but deletion and insert, so upsert.
Oh, okay. So I would say that a full refresh would solve that. Yeah, so periodically you want to actually do a full refresh so you can like run everything again from, like literally just reset the table. So with incremental models, periodically, or when you see like something has changed, you want to actually do a full refresh to actually sort that out. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, we have transactional tables with something like 100 million records, and we have to handle a certain stream of cancellations of past records and feed that into the past transactions. But that would seem like we have a continuous stream of these, so there would be a daily full refresh is what I'm is what I'm hearing now.
You might also want to consider if that could be a good candidate for snapshots. Yeah. That could be like a potential model that you want to actually snapshot also in a way.
I'll look into that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. Okay, I'll hand it over to Stephen, Chloe at this point.
Yes. All right. Stephen,
I actually do have one other quick question. Chisom, have you looked into DBT Fusion yet? The new tool they released? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, I saw that. I saw that recently, but I haven't actually like looked much into it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no problem then.
Okay.
I know it's very new, so if anyone else on the call has used it, please let us know if you have any thoughts. But it's supposed to be like DBT Core, but with some additional superpowers running Rust under the hood instead of whatever DBT is written in. But I'll leave it at that.
Cool. So if nobody else has any questions, we can. Or does anybody have a question?
Well, maybe just follow up on because you were asking about Fusion. Not long ago, I heard that DBT was adding a particular semantic layer support. Have you worked with the semantic layer?
a bit. I know DBT added that to their cloud product a little while, but my understanding was that it was never added to core. So that'd be interesting if they're bringing this into Fusion.
Yeah. Nice.
So we have more research to
Blessing?
do on that, but yeah, go ahead.
Blessing has raised a hand.
Yeah, hi, good evening. Thank you, Chisom. That was really nice. I just have something to add to the question Oscar asked. So I think for incremental models in DBT, you usually specify unique keys, and sometimes it uses the merge strategy. So depending on data warehouse, I guess. So when DBT checks for a row with the unique key, if it exists, it updates it. Then if it doesn't, it inserts it. I think that's how it works. So just wanted to mention that.
Excellent. Thank you, Blessing. I'll look into the merge strategy because our data warehouse does support that.
All right, then.
Yeah, thank you for the addition, Blessing.
Well, if that is all, okay, for this last.
The questions are coming in. We love it.
Yeah, so my name is Angel, by the way, so I have to fix that first and last. Apologize for that. So I'm pretty new with this DBT, but I got a question is if I'm processing a batch of data and for some reason in the middle of the process, there's a crash, right? So DBT is gonna continue from the process that stopped, or is going to reprocess everything from zero, from scratch. So I'm transforming data, right? A batch of data, and the middle of the process fail for any reason. If I start a process again, it's going to start from the moment that there was the crash, or it's going to start the process, start over again. That's basically my question.
Chisom, maybe I'll jump in on this one. I dropped in a command in the chat that I find myself using often. So it will restart from scratch every time you run it, because you run a DBT command, which will run the series of models. So the first time you run it, you have to run it that way. But then in future runs, you can actually use this DBT retry command, which I just put in the chat, which actually allows you to resume the previous run from whatever point it errored at. So you can see an error, go in and try to fix whatever has to be fixed, and then do retry. And then, let's say you were 80% through all of the models you needed to run. Now this way you won't have to rerun that first chunk of models. You'll just rerun from the error to the end.
Okay, so are there any more questions? Okay, so that concludes today's summer camp session. Chisom, thank you so much. That was amazing. That was so insightful, and everyone has learned so much. I think that was our longest Q&A that we've had so far, which is awesome. And so yeah, so thank you guys for attending. And so if you guys attended the session, I will mark you down. And if you attend 3 sessions, like I said before, you'll get the certification. And you don't have to attend 3 sessions in a row, just any 3 sessions. Next week, we will be having our session on transformers, a workshop on like beyond DBT. So it can kind of be, you might be able to think of it as like a part 2 to this session. And that'll be hosted by Josh Hall from Coalesce. And yeah, and so you all will get an email with the link to the recording, and they'll also all be published to our YouTube. So yes, thank you guys once again for joining. And yes, so also I'll put a link to our, if you haven't found us on LinkedIn yet, in the email will also be a link to our LinkedIn as well. So thank you guys.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Chisom.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.